I had walked out of war zones with dust in my lungs and blood on my boots, but nothing prepared me for the cold bite of handcuffs snapping shut around my wrists in the heart of my own country. One moment I was stepping out of a deployment briefing, head still filled with coordinates, casualty reports, and logistics for the next rotation overseas. The next moment, I was a prisoner. No warning, no explanation, just the sharp command of a man in uniform who wouldn't meet my eyes. The steel closed around my wrists so tightly I could feel the pulse in my veins throbbing against it. "You're under arrest for the murder of your father-in-law," the officer said. The words hit me harder than any blast I'd survived overseas. Murder? My father-in-law? The old man I'd just seen 3 days ago, full of bourbon and venom, smirking like always as if he alone held the strings of my life? Alive then. Dead now. And me, the soldier he had always despised, branded as his executioner. They didn't give me time to argue. I was marched past men who had trusted me with their lives in firefights, who had watched me stand unflinching under fire. Their faces froze when they saw me in chains. Some looked away. Some didn't. That walk from the briefing room to the waiting vehicle was the longest of my life, not because of the steps, but because of the eyes. The court process that followed was swift. Too swift. It was as if the script had been written long before the old man's heart stopped beating. Every motion, every ruling, every piece of evidence presented felt rehearsed, practiced, inevitable. And then came the testimony. My son. My own flesh and blood. He took the stand without hesitation. His voice didn't tremble, not even once. He looked at the jury, not at me, and swore he had seen me do it. Swore he had watched me kill the man. His words fell like hammer strikes against my chest. He had been coached, trained to deliver those words, but the jury didn't see that. They saw only a boy testifying against his father. My wife filed for divorce that same week. Custody papers. Asset division. The ink had been waiting on her pen. She didn't grieve. She didn't visit me in the holding cell. She didn't even look at me in court. She simply leaned toward her lawyer with an efficiency that spoke of preparation. It should have broken me. A wife turned enemy. A son turned witness. A life turned lie. But I didn't break. Soldiers don't break. We bend. We endure. We plan. The judge leaned forward one morning and asked if I had anything to say before sentencing. My wrists were chained to the table. The courtroom was thick with anticipation, the spectators hungry for the final blow. I slid one sealed envelope across the polished wood surface. My last request. My final weapon. The judge opened it. His eyes scanned words he hadn't expected to see. His face drained of color. Then hardened. "Bailiffs," he said sharply. "Lock the doors." The silence that followed was heavier than any sentence could have been. The room shifted. My wife stiffened. My son's eyes finally flicked toward me, betraying the smallest crack in his armor. But before that silence, before that envelope, before the unraveling, there was the betrayal. And betrayal, I've learned, is never loud. Betrayal doesn't come with slammed doors and shouted confessions. Betrayal is quiet. Subtle. It waits until you're distracted, then guts you from the inside out. My wife had been the architect. My son the accomplice. My father-in-law the perfect corpse to hang around my neck. And me? I was the mark. The old man had always despised me. Too disciplined, too unshakable. He was a man of power games, a man who thrived on manipulation and weakness, and I had denied him that. He couldn't control me. He couldn't bend me. In his eyes, that made me an enemy. I thought his death would end his games. Instead, it became their weapon. Looking back, the signs were there. My wife's whispered late-night phone calls. The way she snapped her laptop shut when I entered the room. The smile that seemed painted, never reaching her eyes. I told myself she was tired. That marriage eroded over time, not by choice but by entropy. I told myself she was simply slipping away. I was wrong. She hadn't been eroding, she had been building. She had been planning. And my son, the boy who once clung to my leg when I left for deployments, who once cried when I missed birthdays, who once swore he wanted to be like me, he stood on that stand and swore I was a killer. He didn't hesitate. That was the moment I realized he had been rehearsed. Betrayal hadn't just seeped into my marriage, it had bled into my bloodline. The world believed I was cornered. I let them believe it. I sat in the cell. I ate the meals. I answered their questions with rehearsed calm. But inside, I catalogued everything. Every date. Every timeline. Every inconsistency. A soldier fights with the weapons he has, and in that cell, patience was my oldest weapon. I requested discovery. I requested witness lists. I requested forensics, paperwork, anything I could get my hands on. They thought I'd drown in it. They thought I'd never piece it together. But I did. The autopsy was too clean. The times didn't align. Phone records suggested calls that should never have been made. And then, buried deep in the debris of data, I found it. A bank transfer. Silent, precise, impossible to explain away. Money funneled quietly into an account. My wife's name. My son's signature. Weeks before the death. It wasn't grief that filled me when I found it. It was vindication. They thought they had buried me alive. But in their haste, they had left fingerprints on the shovel. I didn't rage. Rage is wasteful. Rage is sloppy. I planned. I sharpened my answer not in words, but in evidence. I sealed it away, biding my time, waiting for the moment they thought I was beaten. That moment came in the courtroom. The judge's eyes moved across the page once. Then again, slower, his lips tightening as though repetition might soften what he was reading. It didn't. The documents laid it bare. Falsified testimony, payments traced, recordings transcribed. A conspiracy woven not in shadows, but in arrogance. My wife gasped, her hand flying to her mouth before she could stop herself. My son's mask cracked, his wide eyes darting toward me in sudden childlike fear. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth, when armed properly, doesn't need a voice. It detonates silently. The judge's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Bailiffs. Lock the doors. For the first time since the handcuffs had closed, I breathed without weight. She turned toward me then, my wife, her lips trembling. How long have you known? I met her gaze with the calm of a man who had already buried his illusions. The evidence sprawled across the bench was an autopsy of her lies. The affair. The money. The manipulation of our son. Every secret she had sharpened against me was now dull and useless under the light of truth. Her hands shook. My son's eyes darted, fear bleeding through his mask of certainty. I leaned forward, the chains clinking softly. You thought I was blind. But blindness is a choice. I watched. I waited. And I let you hang yourself. Her tears came then, loud, desperate, drowning tears. But they weren't for me. They were for herself. For the collapse of her empire of lies. The trial didn't end with a gavel. It ended with silence. The kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. She was led away. My son followed, his steps heavy, the weight of betrayal finally pressing down on him. Too late. Far too late. And me? I sat there calm. Not victorious. Not broken. Simply free. People believe betrayal destroys you. But betrayal doesn't destroy. It refines. It strips away sentiment. It leaves only clarity. I walked out of that courtroom not as a husband. Not as a father. Not as an accused man. I walked out as something colder. Stronger. Unbound. And when the heavy doors closed behind me, I realized the final truth. They had tried to bury me. But I was the one holding the shovel.